What's going on, everybody? JHow here, and in this Diablo 3 Barbarian build, we're going to talk about what is at the top of Season 16 in the Season of Grandeur, and how you can make this build work in seasonal and non-seasonal. Talk about the skills, the gear, and some of the gameplay, and how you need to run this. So let's get into it. So quickly, before we start the skills, one thing to note when talking about this is the 4 set of IK is going to reduce the cooldown of Wrath of the Berserker and Call of the Ancients by 3 seconds for every 10 Fury you spend with an attack. That's going to basically set up the entire skills, so let's talk about those. That actually starts with Ancient Spear with Boulder Toss. This is going to just spend all the remaining Fury that you have. Thus, you build up Fury extremely quickly with the Furious Charge, and then you'll be able to dump this. And we'll talk about when to dump this, but you just dump all that Fury, you get the cooldown reduction, and that way you have 100% uptime on some of your skills. Next up, Furious Charge. Now, you're going to go with Battering Ram. You'll get all of the runes with this, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but Battering Ram gives you that fire damage, and it gives you that extra damage. However, if you have certain gear, and most notably your amulet, if it has a certain elemental and you have a better roll on that, whether it's physical or something around those, then you can switch this up in your rune. However, baseline, fire is going to be the most damage. You want to shoot for fire on your amulet and things like that to where you get that fire damage. But if you have something else early in the season, you can switch that up to a different rune. Remember, you get all the runes, but whatever rune you pick is going to give you that elemental damage, which you'll be gearing for. Then we're going to look at Sprint with Marathon. Increase movement speed by 40% per 4 seconds. You want to have 100% uptime on this because the item that you're going to have in your cube is going to give you bonus damage equal to your bonus movement speed. And so getting this up, having the uptime of Sprint, and keeping that up longer with Marathon means that you can just sprint around, you keep this up, and you're going to do that bonus damage. Next up, Battle Rage with Bloodshed. Deal damage equal to 20% of your recent critical hits to enemies within 20 yards every 1 second. Plus, you're going to get that extra damage, just a nice damage boost for this build. For the big hitters, Call of the Ancients together as one. This will help mitigate a lot of your damage. Getting that 50% of all damage dealt to you is instead divided evenly between the Ancients. This increases your toughness throughout and will help you out a lot. You're going to have this up, and you need to make sure that if they die, you can use this. This isn't the main one. You do get the cooldown reduction on this with the Fury spent, and you only need to use it as necessary. But the next one, Wrath of the Berserker with Insanity. You're going to get all of the extra attributes, get that damage. With Insanity, you get that 50% increased damage. This is a major buff. You also get that 4-piece bonus I mentioned, and you're going to have that extra damage with the IK set in general. So you want to have Call of the Ancients up. You want to have the Wrath of the Berserker up, because that's where your major damage bonus comes in by having that 6-piece, and we'll talk about that at the gear. But you're going to use your Furious Charge and your Ancient Spear to build up Fury, to dump Fury, and have 100% uptime on Wrath of the Berserker. For your passives, Nerves of Steel. If you're climbing high greater rifts, this is what you want. If you're just speedrunning or clearing something lower, you can maybe go elsewhere with this, but Nerves of Steel is what you want to climb with. Rampage. You're going to use this. Increase strength, and you can stack this up to 25 times. Since you're going to be Furious Charging everywhere, this allows you to just kind of keep this stacked up, get that extra damage, and really push those high rifts. Brawler, as long as there are 3 enemies within 12 yards, all of your damage is increased by 20%. Another huge damage buff, and in greater rifts, you're always going to find the density should be there to get this procced very easily. And lastly, Berserker Rage. You deal 25% additional damage while near maximum Fury. Now, this is going to help out a lot, and I want to go back to either this one or maybe Brawler or Rampage. When you are at high greater rifts, you are going to need to attack more to get through things quickly, which is when Ruthless comes into play. Ruthless gives you that bonus damage to enemies below 30% health. When you're on the Rift boss, when you're on those elites in the greater rifts, that actually comes into play. So if you have a good Hellfire amulet and you have any of these, you want to mix Ruthless in here. And there are times where it might actually just be better to have Ruthless in there. Having the Brawler, that might be the one that you could trade out reasonably, maybe even Rampage, depending on how you actually function with this build. But some combination of these 3 or 4 is going to help you push those high greater rifts. When it comes to the gear, I already mentioned you're going to be having the 6-piece IK bonus. Remember, this is the season of Grandeur, so you're going to get the 6-piece bonus and the 4-piece bonus of Raekor by wearing 5 pieces and 3 pieces of the Raekor respectively. For the IK set, Call of the Ancients last until they die. You're going to have the cooldown reduction on this, and I already mentioned you only use the Call of the Ancients if you need to get them back in. You get the cooldown reduction with the 4-piece bonus, and the reason you want to have them up is because the 6-piece, while both Wrath of the Berserker and Call of the Ancients is active, you deal 4,000% increased damage, and that's where the big buff comes in. For the IK set, you 100% are going to need the weapon and the belt, and then also you can look at interchanging some of the items, whether it's your gloves, your chest, your helm, your boots. You need some combination. When you look at the other side, Raekor, that's going to be the 4-piece bonus that you get. Furious Charge refunds a charge if it only hits 1 enemy. However, as I mentioned in the skills, you'll get the 4-piece bonus, which gives you every rune, which gives you more cooldown reduction when you hit targets. So that will give you that extra damage, that extra 1,000% increased damage, plus the cooldown reduction. This is a full Furious Charge build. So you'll need the shoulders here, and you can try and roll Furious Charge. Keep in mind that you can roll Furious Charge damage on your shoulders and on your chest piece, so those are 2 good places to pick those up. Another few key things to note when it comes to rolling your damage is that you can get area damage, and area damage does really well at those high rifts when you start to augment your gear. Getting the area damage and Furious Charge damage where you can get it is great. Same for your gloves, getting area damage, but crit chance, crit damage are all the usual. When it comes to your IK weapon, getting the bonus damage, and maybe even life on Fury spent. You want to get area damage, but if your roll is good, life on Fury spent, just getting that extra heal every time you dump one of those boulders out is a good way to try and stay alive at those high rifts. In your gear, you'll want to have the diamonds, including in your helm. While cooldown reduction isn't extremely necessary for this build because you get the cooldown reduction from dumping Fury, there is something to be said about having some cooldown reduction, whether it's on one of your pieces or a couple of your pieces, because Furious Charge acts well when you hit multiple targets. However, sometimes you get stuck in a position to where you're not hitting multiple targets, or you're only hitting a couple, and then next thing you know, you're out of charges. And when you're out of charges, you're basically dead in the water. So having some cooldown reduction, whether it's on one of your rings, maybe 2 of your rings, or even on your shoulders, there is one place for it that we have seen start to spring up, and you might want to go with the diamond in your helm. We have seen some people use another gem to get the extra life, and that can help, but you have to have very good management, and that's really if you're trying to push the top tier and you're just relying on good mobs. So some cooldown reduction will go a long way for this build. For your bracers, the Ancient Parthan Defenders, each stunned enemy within 25 yards reduces your damage taken by up to 12%. You know you're going to be getting that stun in there with the Furious Charge, so this helps you stay alive at those high greater rifts. I mentioned it before, depending on the rune that you have is the elemental damage that you want here. This build, we're building it with fire, you get the crit chance there as well. Speaking of fire damage, the amulet, I mentioned it. If you get a very good roll on an amulet and it has physical damage or another elemental damage, and you get crit chance, crit damage, and a socket, you might want to switch to that. It will allow you to push higher greater rifts based on that extra damage. If you can get that, great. It doesn't matter what your amulet is as long as it has a really good roll. There are some amulets that are better than others. You can even get a good Hellfire amulet depending on where you're at in the season, and that can help push you to the next level. For your rings, the focus and restraint, we know them to be very powerful in a lot of these builds. When you hit with a resource generating attack or primary skill, deal 50% increased damage, which is your Furious Charge. And when you hit with a resource spending attack, deal 50% increased damage for 5 seconds. That is your boulder toss. So despite not needing to throw out too many boulders to keep the cooldown reduction, you got to remember one of your passives is to deal damage when you're at or near max fury. So if you're just constantly throwing the boulder out whenever you have max fury, it's not going to help. You need to have some balance to keeping your fury up, but also proccing your focus and restraint. So keep an eye on that in your action bar. For the cube, you're going to go standoff. I mentioned this a little earlier. Furious Charge deals increased damage equal to 500% of your bonus movement speed, which is where that sprint came in. It also is one of the reasons why getting that speed pylon is actually pretty good for this build. You do that bonus damage will help out a lot. Also, Vile Ward. Furious Charge deals 35% increased damage for every enemy hit while charging. Just a major damage buff that helps you out a lot with this build. And lastly, Band of Might. This is one that can really change it. It took me a long time to get this in season, and the minute I got this, the greater rift level that I'm able to push just climbed drastically. After you cast that Furious Charge, you're going to get 80% reduced damage for 8 seconds, and that really, really helps the tank ability for this build. For your legendary gems, the Bane of the Trapped, you're going to be stunning things. You're going to get that bonus damage of that, easy to proc. Bane of the Stricken at high greater rifts because you're going to be hitting a lot. This really helps on rift bosses as well, so you can really push those top greater rifts with the Bane of the Stricken, else Bane of the Powerful will work. And also Esoteric Alteration, used for climbing those greater rifts. Getting that damage mitigation for the non-physical damage will help you out a lot. Getting the extra resistances as you level this up will really push this to the next level. So you need to have all of these gems and all of this gear to really climb that. But just having the 6-piece bonus of the IK and the 4K of the Raekor, you'll see that you do tremendous damage. But once you start getting all the defensive mechanics in, then you can really start to take it to the next level. This build really is quite simple, and I've basically touched on all the topics so far. You're going to Furious Charge, you're going to try and hit as many in an area as you can. You want to group them up if you can. Getting all the different basic attacks down to where you're charging, and then getting that boulder toss out to pop the focus and restraint, but also to make sure and get the cooldown on your Wrath of the Berserker to have 100% uptime is really all you're looking for. Keeping your sprint active for that bonus movement speed to really hit that Kanai's Cube, that standoff that's in there, is going to help you with a tremendous amount of damage along the way. Outside of that, just keep your cooldown management, keep an eye on your Ancients, make sure they're alive, keep your uptime on Battle Rage, which is very easy to do, but then make sure you have your Wrath up, make sure you balance on when to charge, how much you can group, how much damage you can take, and maybe search out, group things up, search for a pylon in the area, and then come back and just wreak havoc, because the power pylon, conduit pylon, and in this case for the Barbarian, the speed pylon actually helps out a lot, and you can get all kinds of damage in when you get things grouped up in an area and really push those greater rifts. A quick note for you non-season players, if you're running non-seasonal, you might want to look at using the Band of Might to be worn and putting the Ring of Royal Grandeur in your jewelry slot. Then maybe moving over to something like a Convention of Elements to pair with your Band of Might can help you run this build in non-seasonal. It does work. You've seen the buffs to both sets, but there are some different options when we look at non-season. But for seasonal, this is really the cream of the crop. It's pushing a lot. We've seen the HotA builds come out. I've got a video on that. We've seen Leapquake be at or near the top. I've got a video on that. So now we've covered the top 3 builds for Season 16. So be sure and check those out. Make sure and subscribe for future builds around Diablo 3 and some other gaming content as well. Appreciate you guys watching. As always, happy hunting. See you again.